This is the Mulebox, a reactive load attenuator with impulse response speaker simulation that can be used to play tube amps up to 50 watts silently. If you want to learn how to make your own, stick around. Tube amplifiers are a lot of fun, and whilst you certainly can get amazing sounds through a digital modeler or a piece of floor gear or something like that, I do think there's something quite special about turning on a tube amp and plugging your guitar into it. But if, like me, you live in a house with other people and you maybe play when those people are asleep, or like me, you're just not very good and people don't actually like listening to you play, then I think it is important to be able to turn the tube amps down, because a good tube amp will get very, very loud very, very quickly if you want it to sound good. And there are kind of a couple of ways that you can do that. Some amps have a master volume, but that kind of changes the sound a bit. You can use what's called an attenuator, which effectively is a circuit that will dissipate some of the signal that comes out of your amp before it hits your speaker and sort of make your speaker quieter whilst allowing your amp to work at full power. And some attenuators are what's called reactive loads, which means that they kind of behave a little bit like a speaker will do, and that affects the way your tube amp kind of sounds. And some reactive loads also have a digital output, so then we use a type of modeling technology to effectively simulate the sound of a guitar speaker, and maybe some microphones on that guitar speaker in different configurations. And if you want to play silently, then that's sort of the way to go. So you plug your tube amp into a reactive load kind of attenuating circuit, and then you use some sort of digital modeling for the speaker, and then you get sound that you can have in your headphones or on a pair of sort of quieter speakers or something like that. And that is really how I've been playing guitar for the last couple of years, with a small number of exceptions. This is the aux box. It allows you to take your tube amp, like one of these guys, and play it through headphones or a mixer or through a speaker at the lower volume. And it includes cabinet simulation, which means even if you don't have a speaker connected, it'll sound as if you're playing through a real speaker. The aux box is an amazing piece of gear, but it is pretty expensive. And there are other things that do the same sort of basic function, like the 2-Notes Captor X or the Boss Tube Amp Expander. But they're also pretty expensive. And I wanted to have a second device like that so that I could play 2 amps at the same time. And to do that, I created the Mulebox. The Mulebox is sort of 2 devices stuck together. First of all, there is an attenuator, and you can see through here some big resistors and components. Using a design by a guy called John H. On an online forum, and I'll put a link in the description. The attenuator allows you to safely plug your tube amplifier into this box using the special plug at the back here. And first of all, that makes sure that your tube amp is not going to get damaged. You need to make sure you have an appropriate load whenever you turn a tube amp on. And secondly, it dissipates all the extra power that comes out of the speaker output as heat, which is why we have these big resistors. It's also why we have all this ventilation, and at the back here there is a little fan as well to try and keep this thing cool, because it'll work up to a 50-watt amp, and if you plug a 50-watt amp in and you turn it up to sort of maximum volume, this little box gets pretty hot. The second part of it, which you may be able to see through here, is a a little piece of electronics called the Daisy Seed, and it's sitting on a printed circuit board called the hothouse. And what the Daisy Seed does is it allows you to basically write code that does digital signal processing. And the hothouse gives you stereo inputs and outputs and the ability to connect a couple of knobs. And so we've wired the output of the attenuator directly into the input of the Daisy Seed. And then the Daisy Seed sends stereo out, left and right. And it's powered by a 9-volt power supply, just like you would use for a guitar pedal. And the power supply also powers the fan. And then on the back here, there's a little trim knob, and that's to make sure that you don't clip the input. So depending on how loud your tube amp is, it could overload the inputs of the Daisy Seed, so you can sort of dial that down. And on the front, we got a couple of knobs. This one here used to say bass because it used to be a bass control, but I've decided to change it, so it is now a reverb control. And the other one is the output level for the things on the back. And then we have this rotary switch here, very satisfying, which is used to select which cabinet simulation you want to use. So fundamentally, this thing runs on impulse responses, so-called IRs. An impulse response is effectively a tiny little file that explains how a particular speaker or a particular device might react to sound. And you can buy IR packs, and you can find some free ones, and I've included about 6 ones that I recorded in here, so they're kind of, you can use them. But you can load your own, and basically that is what allows you to make the output coming out of the back here sound as if it is going through a speaker. And so what you do is you plug your tube amp in here, plug some power in here, you plug stereo outputs into a mixer or into a set of active speakers or something like that, or headphone amplifier. And then you pick which cabinet you want, what you want it to sound like, and you can dial in some reverb. There's a lovely kind of plate reverb in here, and you can set your output level so that it control how loud it comes through your speakers or your headphones. And then these little LEDs will tell you a little bit about what's going on. And with that, you are actually able to play your app silently, effectively, or through headphones or through a set of speakers. So what is maybe interesting about the Mulebox is that it is open source. And so all the schematics and instructions for building this, all the software, all the kind of templates for getting the enclosure made, all that stuff is available for free as an open source project. You can contribute to it. You can take it as a starting point for making your own device. You could do something totally different with it. Or you could just build your own that's exactly like this one. The enclosure is a Hammond 5090 DD box, and it is sold and drilled and painted and UV printed, with the exception of this thing that I stuck a label on, by Teda Electronics, who has a service for doing that kind of thing, and it's pretty cost effective. There are a bunch of components inside that you need to buy. It might add up to $150 or euros or whatever currency you're interested in, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. And if you have a sort of a basic understanding of how to solder, how to kind of do electronics, like you build an effects pedal before, for example, or even an amplifier, then you can put all the hardware together. And then for the software, I mean, you need to have some basic development tools that are free on a computer. I'm using a Mac. Maybe Linux will be fine. Maybe Windows will be okay. I don't know. And then you can sort of flash the software that comes with the Mulebox, but you can also modify it. You can put your own IR files in when you load them up, and you can make this device your own. So here is the Mulebox kind of plugged in. If you can see at the back, I've got some stereo outputs on here. They're going to this little tiny mixer that I'm using. That is 9 volts power that goes to a kind of pedal power supply that's on the floor. That is a speaker cable, and it's important to use a speaker cable and not a kind of shielded instrument cable. And that effectively is connected to the speaker output of my amplifier. Now I've got two amps here. One is like a Marshall style JTM 45 type thing, and the other one is essentially a single channel deluxe reverb in a Princeton kind of form factor. I do have this little Delisle amp speaker selector box that allows me to kind of pick what goes where. And the way this is hooked up right now is that on one means we are going to play through the Princeton, and then later on I can switch it to number 2. And if I turn all those things on just for a second, what is now happening is things are starting to blink. And the red light blinks to tell you how many IRs are loaded. The blue light blinks to tell you which IR is currently selected on the rotary, and then they also blink if there's clipping on either the input or the output, which is important to watch out for. And then basically what we can do is we can change, so at the moment the kind of IR1 by default is a kind of a Fender style that goes pretty well with that deluxe reverb. If I change this here, you'll see it goes, blinks twice and then kind of goes solid. That means we've gone to the second IR, which in the default build is a kind of Marshall style thing. We've got a few other ones in here. And then if I kind of went to like number 10, for example, there's nothing included. So you can see it's going, all right, I'm going to number 10, and then it stays off. And that means there's nothing in that slot. Now it will still work, but you'll get essentially the raw sound of the amplifier out. It's safe, it's not going to damage your amp, but it doesn't sound very good. So I'm going to put this back to number 1. And we're then going to do a couple of playing examples, but to do that I have to switch my camera gear around. Okay, so is it as good as the Oxbox? No. The Oxbox has a lot more features. It is a more professional device. If you are a touring musician or something like that, I definitely recommend you buy something like the Oxbox or the Captor X, which is a bunch cheaper. And I used to have one of those and it was pretty good. Or one of the other devices that does this. But I do think it sounds pretty good. I think it's pretty flexible. I think it is a nice small form factor. I think it's very fun to be able to program it and change it. If you don't like something about it, you can modify the code, or if you need to use a different type of amp, like a different speaker output or something like that, you can modify the hardware. And I think DIY stuff is very fun. I have a couple of DIY amps, as you may have seen in the video. I have a whole bunch of DIY pedals. Building things for your guitar playing can be a lot of fun. I do want to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, John H. on the Marshall Forum is the designer of the attenuator circuit. He is incredibly generous with his time and has answered a bunch of my questions and a bunch of other people's questions about how to build your own attenuator from his design. There's many other things you could do with that design, like you could just build a passive attenuator box that doesn't have any of the speaker simulation stuff. I want to thank Boyd Timothy, who created the Flick pedal. It's another digital effects pedal based on the kind of Hot House and ACC platform. I learned an awful lot by working with Boyd on that and kind of modifying that a little bit, and he answered a bunch of my questions. And I think the Flick is a very interesting, it's a kind of digital delay, reverb, tremolo type circuit that sounds really great, and you should go check that out. I also want to thank Cleveland Music Company, who created the Hot House, which is sort of the PCB that the ACC sits on. I think they're a pretty small company, and they've released their printed circuits board as open source, and they've provide all the schematics, and it's a very kind of DIY friendly platform. I actually managed to take their PCB design and get it manufactured, which was a lot more cost effective than getting it shipped. So many thanks for them for doing that, and that's one of the reasons why I also wanted this to be open source. And yeah, I hope you found that interesting. If you build it, I'd love for you to let me know, or if you've got questions, do ask, and all the links for everything you need will be in the description.